This is the Advaita After Hours podcast, where we explore how spirituality influences our daily lives. Hari Om. I am Rajesh, and in today's conversation, Narayanan, Shillika, and I reflect on the concept of Sharanagati, or surrender, in the modern context. We talk about the relationship between surrender, ego, and unconditional love. Finally, we discuss the impact of our desires on our ability to surrender. So sit back, listen, and reflect as you join us on this journey. So today we'll kick off with a topic that Naranji suggested would be kind of a natural transition from last week's um, discussion, which is this idea around surrender or Sharanagati. So maybe we'll start there, Naranji. Sharanagati, surrender. Anytime we come up with an English word for a Sanskrit term, it's a little bit of making a round peg fit into a square box. But how close do you think surrender captures the idea of Sharanagati?
In general, it's hard, like you said, it's hard to fit a Sanskrit word in the real context of how we want. But if we add a lot of bells and whistles like we normally do to all these explanations, I think you can get to a fair enough point as to what it actually means. And most, if you look at even not just Hinduism, even in Buddhism, right? Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. In Hinduism, there is lots of temples where you say Sharanam, especially in Kerala, for Sabrimala, for example, it's all about Sharanam. It's all about complete sacrifice, so that a complete surrender. But that gives, I mean, I always thought about this. Is if Sabrimala is complete surrender, are there temples that let you go without complete surrender, and is that okay? Right? Is that Sharanagari? Is there are the temples without complete idea of Sharanagari? But again, it was just intellectual um, brainstorming and playing around. But the idea that surrender with your entire instruments of body, mind, and intellect, and those are the only three things you can surrender eventually. And in Shabarimala, and because you asked this, I'll tell you kind of that structure. In Shabarimala, all the rituals you do, and these days not everybody does it in a very systematic form, but the symbolism is about the surrender of body, mind, and intellect. Even the coconut that you carry is the body. You open the coconut, remove the water, you fill the ghee within, and the ghee is your mind and intellect, and you take that coconut filled with ghee, and when you take it to Shabarimala, you put it in the fire, which is burning right underneath which basically means I'm giving up my identifications with body, mind, and intellect to you. Right. So there is symbolism of surrender. And of course, I've done it many times mechanically. All I need when I throw that coconut with ghee in Sabrimala was to get away from the crowd and try and go up and see the god. So it was, the mindset is completely different. But eventually what is being looked at is the idea that you surrender with your entire Sharanagati is surrender with your entire being, all equipments that you have.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that I've always seen the word Sharanagati as being both a process and a destination. In that, oftentimes it can be described as getting to Sharanagati, getting to that point where you have absolutely surrendered, to which um, you find glory and freedom, right? In that you don't feel bound by needing to do the actions, or bound by the outcomes of the actions, or bound by expectations. And that destination is Sharanagati. But then also to practice Sharanagati, or to practice this idea of surrender, is also, so it's kind of like this verb and a noun, I guess, is to get in one way thoughtful about it. But I think the destination, even though it's abstract, is a little bit easier in my mind to understand than what does the process look like. Shilka, any thoughts on surrender and the process? Like, what does it feel like to surrender? What does it mean to try and practice surrender?
Yeah, I think somewhere I wonder if the process of surrendering the body, mind, soul starts with um, just the act of giving up things. I mean, even from materialistic things. I mean, the first thoughts that came to me when you were talking was um, about like Karna or King Ranti Deva, about how they're willing to give up everything and in that process, kind of attain Sharanagati, if that makes sense. Because when in the battlefield, he gives up, like everything, like his kavacham, his kundalam, which is supposed to, and I feel like those are acts in which he's surrendering everything.
And I think the other thing that's amazing about Karna is not just that he surrendered, but the thoughtlessness in surrendering, meaning that, sometimes when we part way with something, we think twice or three times and we think, oh, maybe I might need it in the future. Right. But when Karna ripped, like, literally or metaphorically ripped his kavacham off and gave it, knowing that he's going to go into battle. Right. And he didn't think twice about it. I think that is not just the act of surrendering or the act of tyaga or sacrifice, but also the attitude of doing it also.
I mean, and the same
And
thing with King Ranti Deva. I think the same thing you can say even with Harishchandra. He's a king who is supposed to have lived and ruled, and there was a big famine and drought, and people were suffering. So he's supposed to have just kind of given everything away, and he and his family fasted for about 48 days so that everybody else could kind of just keep have their bellies full. And on his 48th day, somebody actually came and brought him a plate full of food. And he was about to put a bite in his mouth when somebody came forward and said, "I'm really hungry. Can you give me something?" And he gives. And somebody else comes, and says, "I want water." He gives. And, he ultimately lands up with not even a drop of water. And somebody else comes and asks him, why are you giving when you don't even have something for yourself? And he says, I'm not I you know I, I'm paraphrasing over here, but he says, I'm not looking for the heavens, I'm not looking for something big. I would much rather see people over here without suffering than anything big for myself. Like, and it's just, and all the devatas and gods appear before him and say that that was just a test, and he's blessed with plentiful, and his kingdom gets everything that they need. And that, I mean, that's the story. But it's, I think, when you can give up things that you have, it's one way of beginning to give up that identity that you associate with yourself, perhaps. um Saying, if you're not holding on to these are my things, slowly I think you start to see that what is mine.
and in some ways, I feel like the current uh, personal finance sense um, hinders this ability to, I think, start to surrender, right? I mean, the idea that, first you secure your retirement account, then you secure your children's education, then you say, okay, of all of my money this year, I'm going to put aside some percentage to give as charity, but only after you've kind of, taken care of yourself first. And, you kind of put off that till a point when you can afford to give. I think all sets up this false reality that there is security to be found in that. And to me, the idea of Sharanagati is getting out of that security bubble, to give first and then to keep later. And then to also realize that um, the financial security that we think retirement planning gives us is not as secure as we think it is. and that maybe the ultimate security isn't even in a dollar amount in retirement, but in having your expectations managed by what needs to be managed. So it's the expectation management rather than the financial management.
Two thoughts to that, right? I mean, I think one, you could also say when you're talking about your retirement planning and things like that, one could argue saying that if you don't have, you're not able to truly give.
But in your story, that was a perfect example of he didn't have, but he was still giving.
Yes. No, but I'm just placing the other side too. If he had, how much more would he give? You know, I mean, I'm not trying to say that there's one and not the other. I think, but when we do talk about Sharanagati, I do think of, Deva and Harishchandra and Karna. Um,
Those are examples of giving up everything that you have, and you need a certain level of mental maturity and purity to do that. I mean, Karna, how much ever you vilify all the things that he has done, there is a level of mental purity because of all his actions and all of that in that. So to get there, and so it is not just about, to Rajeshji's point about giving, the attitude of giving matters way more than giving, in terms of surrender, right? So if you have only very little to give, but you are willing to give that, versus you're willing to part 50% of your enormous wealth, there's I mean, we see that nowadays, to your personal finance thing, you see nowadays there are a couple of people who are just giving away wealth that somebody earned happily now, right? Given that now they're in a certain situation in life that they can afford to do that. And there are people who are saying that, no, I've lived till 1995, I'm going to give away all my billions of dollars to all these charities now. And those are definitely, giving away at any point of time is a good thing, but they all come with having secured everything that you have. You've taken care of all the bases, and now this is actually, in terms of people with those billions of dollars, these are really not useful money for them. And you can always ask, can they made it to use for something else? But generally, in terms of all of that, it's not useful money. So there is one attitude that they're giving out, versus if you have only one square meal and you are willing to part that with somebody else. So that but I look at this in a slightly different way in Sharanagati, not just as giving material stuff up, giving wealth up, giving whatever, giving up. It is basically not physically giving up. It is the attitude to give up when needed. You may not give up anything now. You may not have to give up, but you have reached that point where, if required, you're willing to, or at that point of time, you're willing to give up everything. That mental purity. And you may still work in the world, because of several things, and it could be karmas, vasanas, whatever it is. You still work in the world, you still do all that is required without being attached to, and nobody else but you will know that. Your Sharanagati is completely and totally your internal knowledge. Not even the person sharing the house with you may know it.
There's a theory of it, but if we have to think about how do we start to practice it, right? How do we start to get used to or get into the habit of being able to surrender? Because to start at level 10 and say, I'm going to surrender all of my insecurities, surrender all of my decision making, and come what may, is, I think, a hard place to start unless you've been like, you know, had a miraculous touch by the hand of God or some life altering experiences. I think for the majority of people, what you hope is that incrementally through each phase in your life, you start to gain a little bit more wisdom over time. And I guess that's one reason I kind of go back to this idea of um, material possessions and how do you at least start to do that as a starting point? Because that is one place where I think I still feel like there's the most social dissonance between what I think our scriptures say and then what I think society at large says, either directly or indirectly. And one thing that we talked a lot about at Chinmay Mission last year on this time of the year was this idea of giving and donation, and where giving and donation helps. And one thing that one of the children had brought up actually is that they had said that sometimes when you start giving things up, you don't want it as much. So, not the reverse, not that you don't want it, so you give it away. That we all experience, right? But that when you start giving it away, you also don't want it as much. And I thought that was a really, it just was such a astute observation that it made me reflect on that for a long time.
Isn't human psychology that way, that you give up something and you don't have it, you don't feel the need for it anymore? I think I've read that somewhere, saying that one of the ways to drive giving is to reflect on what you have lost, and you will find that you have lost nothing in terms of material stuff. So to your point, Rajesh, I think it makes perfect sense. I think we have to start from the material level. But the transition from, and I've struggled with this, and I'm sure there are people who have not struggled with this and can do this seamlessly. But I've struggled with this idea of taking a material example and then extrapolating into one's self spiritual realm, right? So the way I think the best way to train surrender, and like our scriptures also say, is to start with love. Being able to unconditionally love. And I've asked this question: how many people have I unconditionally loved? Unconditionally, really meaning unconditionally all the time. I think it is an exercise worth doing for all of us. How many people have we unconditionally loved? And what was the evolution of the love? Um, I think we keep boundaries for love. Once that is dissolved, I mean, again, this is all still an evolving process. But I think once that is done, once we are able to love people unconditionally, totally, I think their surrender begins.
Expand on that. Why do you think unconditional love leads to surrender or freedom from like the action consequence cycle?
No, nothing relieves you from the action consequence cycle, right? I think that is a given. You cannot expect any of your action other than your action itself to do anything to the cause and effect, or the action and the consequence cycle. I don't think anything that does it. But to make that subtle mental shift from idam na mama, nothing is mine, that feeling comes by. So who would you be willing to give everything to? I mean, naturally, that is somebody who you love unconditionally, love totally unconditionally. And the way that scriptures teach us is to love, to get to that unconditional love for God. If you think everything is God, you have to start that unconditional love with everything around you, right? Being able to love everything around you, like Jesus said, love thy neighbor like you love you. So that level, and so surrender, I think, begins again. It's a practice that probably is not very easy, but I think from a spiritual point of view of surrender, no matter what your material wealth is, of course you do what is, and that is, I think, that is more of a societal, that's your moral ethical compass of how much you drive, how much you give, and do all of that. From your own spiritual point of view, your surrender is a proportional to how much total love you, how much, like this talked about Ma Sharada, Sri Ramakrishna's story of Ma Sharada. She used to cry inconsolably when she sees somebody in slight difficulty. She seems to jump on joy and laugh out loud when she sees a little bit of happiness in somebody. When that kind of your mental purity at that kind of level, I think what that then everything that you do is surrender. I think this is all broad brushing of
No, I
theoretical
mean,
concepts.
I love that that linkage. Shilika, what do you think about this unconditional love and surrender connection?
I'm still thinking about it, but I think uh in one way, what the thought that came to me when you said that was, when you have that kind of unconditional love towards one and all beings around you, it's almost to me like, we were talking about bhakti a few weeks ago, and the idea of, say, Shabari, right? And we spoke about how Shabari saw Rama in everybody who came through her doors. And she says to Rama, today you happen to be Rama, but for me, everybody who's come into this place is Rama. Right? I mean, so that's kind of the story that came to mind when you were talking about this. And I think that's such a beautiful way to think about Sharanagati, because I think now, Shabri would be a great example of that kind of surrender. I have surrendered unto you, because anything and everything that happens to me, that comes to me right now, is you. And so I have, kind of, I mean, that's kind of my takeaway from what you said right now.
You know, one context in which I've always seen surrender also is having complete belief or faith, meaning that for most things in life, we keep a locus of control within ourselves, right? I control this, I control that, I plan for this, I plan for that, I regret this, I regret that. The control is within ourselves. But if we're able to take that control that's within us and slowly move that locus of control to somebody else, namely God, and say, I have completely surrendered to your wishes. I have nothing to regret necessarily because I didn't have any role in that outcome. I don't have much to plan for other than plan to continue to love you because you only determine what's going to happen next. For me, I've always seen the process of surrender as being able to take that ego control notion that you have and transfer it onto somebody else. Just like an infant will never plan to have its meal or plan to be changed or regret that it soiled itself because it is completely surrendered to the mother. How do we get to that point? And I think now that I think about it, what Narayanji said about love and what I'm saying about this idea of the locus of control are the same. But somehow in my mind, my first impulse when I hear the word unconditional love is I start to think that there's still some attachment involved there, right? Like that person that we love. We are attached in some way that we feel like we have to give them that love or they have to earn it. And maybe that's what that unconditional is saying, right? That we have no choice but to love that person because we've given everything to that person.
Correct. And yeah, there is no choice. I think that's probably the right word. There's no choice, but that's how it is. And you are, I don't know what examples. Your infant example was a good example. I don't, Shilika ji might know more Bhagavatam kind of examples. I don't off the top of my head get, remember such examples, even though there are indications even in Bhagavad Gita when you talk about come to me as if there is nothing, right? Come to me, I am the only one. So that is Mamegam Sharanam Braja, like in Sarvadharman Paritejya. I'm the only, knowing that I'm the only refuge for you, understanding that I am the only refuge for you. You have no other choice but to come to me. With that understanding, you come to me. So it also in at that level, it also portrays a helplessness. Sharanagati also is a helplessness, right? You have nothing else. This is the only place that you can go.
Yeah, and in that way, it even ties it back to the reflections we had on Sundarakand from Swami Aparajitananda last week, in that not only did Hanuman profess um, his uh, not only did he surrender fully to Rama, but in doing that, or to be able to do that, he also completely surrendered his ego. And so I think there is probably one of the biggest linkages that we have to continue to witness within ourselves, because we cannot continue to have an ego and I-ness and then still try to get to this idea um, of surrender. So even if we go back to my original proposition of giving wealth or giving donations, maybe that thought itself is flawed. Is it really my money to give? Is it really my food to give? Is it really my clothing donation to make? When did it ever belong to me?
I think that's where we were talking about, starting somewhere, right? Like the more you give, the more you realize, and I think in that spiritual journey too, you start to see that it was never really yours to give, and you're kind of disassociating the things from yourself. That's how I look at it.
So if we sit more on this idea of giving up that locus of control, or that sense of ego, or that sense of you controlling your destiny, and or you having controlled your past, how do you think about starting to get away from that mindset? How do you practically make small steps to get out of that mindset of feeling like you are in control of everything?
But there are you cannot in practical in the everyday life that we lead, you cannot also say that I don't control anything, right? You have to have that idea of, in whatever you do, control the controllables. You have to understand there is certain things that you have to control and you can control, and you must work on that. But when it comes to the results of what you have done, I think that's where the controllables can completely go away. You can, in your actions, you can have the controllables, but the outcome, you can say, none of those are my controllables. My ego is only in my action. Because without ego, I can't even lift my little finger, right? The feeling of I has to be there. It has to come from within, that I do this. I am the doer. I am aware. I am the thinker. Has to come from within for me to do any single act. There, I have to have the ego to do it. But then once the action is done, I think I should leave my controllable angle behind, and then the outcome has to be a grace, a blessing, something that you get as a reward.
That is the second Gita Panchamrit too, right? Karmanye adhikaraste.
I have only adhigara on my karma, not on the phala.
I think we've kind of like finished this on a very beautiful note, in that the surrender can happen after dissociate yourself from the action after it's done, right?
The outcome of the action.
From the outcome.
The interesting thing that also made me think about is, during one of our satsangs, someone had asked this question of Swamiji, which is, um, sometimes I have multiple things to choose, actions. Which action do I choose? And then he said, listen to the voice in your head from God and follow that. Then somebody else asked a follow-up question. I'm forgetting who asked all these, but somebody else asked a follow-up question where, there's so many voices. How do I know which is God's voice and which is my ego's voice? And then the answer that Swamiji gave was,
Pray
do it in
and
the
what?
morning,
Yeah.
do it right after you pray. And that voice, that purest voice, is God's voice. And that to me was very powerful. And in that sense, you start to, I think, get to where many of the Mahatmas have gotten to, which is, I was telling Shillika that, my Hindi is not very good. And so things like the Hanuman Chalisa, I can catch words here or there, but mostly I have no idea what I'm saying. So I was just reading the lyrics to it. And, at the very, very end, even Tulsidas says, it is from Parvati and Shiva's grace that these words are coming through Tulsi Das as a microphone. And, we talked about how surrender is at least taking ownership of the action, but not the outcome. But I think the next step is to also say that even the action is not your choice, that you are just the mechanism or the vessel for the action.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is also, that's the logical explanation that you can give, right? How do you do one action? Why are you doing an action? Um, are you propelled by, and Bhagavad Gita says that Prakriti does everything. Prakriti Kriyamana, and it's clearly said Prakriti does all the actions, nobody else. Prakriti, when Prakriti meaning including all the changeable stuff, savasanas and all of that, just the action, and there is a certain element of how that happens. So yes, you can do it, but what Bhagavad Gita also asks us is to evaluate your actions through self effort. Think about what you're doing. So when Arjuna asks what kind of actions, because you're asking me to do ghora karmas in terms of war, you're asking me to go and kill this, is this an action what you want? So he says ghora karma or any of these karmas are not defined by what you think you do it. It is defined by the all the Prakriti has already defined the action. As a kshatriya, your job is to fight and do war. So doing war is not, so swadharmam nidhanam shreya, so swadharmam whatever, paradharmo bhayavaham, there's a slogan like that, right? Whatever is your swadharma, you have to absolutely do, and there is no way that you can stop. So there is this what Gita is there in Mahabharata, there is Vyada Gita. There is this Vyada Gita in Mahabharata where one butcher is portrayed as a highly evolved spiritual person, and he is advising to a Swami who has been doing penance under a tree for ages. And so when he was really, the Swami was really confused as to different things. He hears a voice somewhere, go and ask this butcher in this town, and this guy is explaining to him the action and the karma while cutting meat. So it is about the karma, the actions that you have to do, which are propelled by Prakriti, and you do it. And it's all you have to do it, whatever your assigned karma is, and there's no running away from it.
But even there, the attitude with which you discharge your duty matters.
That is
And
what's
so, if you're doing it with the right attitude, which is an attitude of non doership, then everything becomes a Sharanagati already.
right. So because this guy is saying, I'm doing it because my mother is so ill in the house, and if I have to get her medicines and feed her, this is the only way that I can do it to her. I do it to, and so this is my duty to her, to make sure that I take care of her, and I'm doing it with God in my mind in every cut I make, or something like that.
So, we talked a little bit about um, surrender in terms of the things that we have. We talked about surrender in terms of the actions that we have. We talked about surrender even in terms of in terms of the outcomes, and we talked about it in terms of the action. I think the one thing that I'd like to touch on at the end is surrender in terms of the desires that we have. Because in some ways, um, you could say that desire is what drives almost everything that we have, right? Whether it is anger, whether it is ego, everything. So when we talk about desire, how do we start to surrender our desires, or where is the role of desire in surrender? Because we had started, I think we were talking about it before we started recording, where even the greatest desire, the desire for moksha and liberation, even that desire stands in the way of the ultimate outcome. So where does kind of desire fit into everything, and how do we start to, like in our very, very material day-to-day lives, start to work on chipping away at the desire?
So desire is a graded thing. Desire has gradations. Desire is not one one desire, right? And that's how you look at it. Eventually it'll all dissolve, but to start off, desire is with gradations, and you simply do the sublimation exercise, and that is probably what everybody tells when you start the spiritual journey. Sublimation. You replace your grosser desire with a subtler desire, a grosser desire with a nicer desire. So uh, sublimation is what, because without desires nothing happens. Desire is what gives rise to a thought, thought is what gives rise to an action. So without a desire nothing happens. But the problem are desires that are self-centered, desires that are selfish. So kamat sanjayade krodha, krodhat moho bijayade, mohat bhagati sammoha, sammohat smriti nashat, smriti bramshat, buddhi nasho, buddhi nashat pranashani. That's a ladder of fall, right? Starts with a selfish desire, karma. So the way to do it, as per our scriptures and as we are all taught, is to sublime a lower desire with a higher desire. So third chapter of Gita in the Karma Yoga is all about doing everything in a yajna bhava as an offering to somebody else higher than me. Everything that you do as an offering. So the idea that you do um, um, before you eat, right? Before you chant the sloga, before you eat, saying that I'm offering this to you, and then of course you're eating. Eventually, you're eating, but you are changing your mindset and attitude as to the offering is for you. The puja that I'm doing is for you, the one that's higher than me. Of course, I have to eat to sustain my body and do it, but I don't want to keep eating in a sense of selfish. I want to prosper myself, but since I have to eat to sustain my body, why don't you take it and bless it so that I can eat? Which means you've given your desire of eating simply, it's a bodily desire, but I've given it to a higher purpose. So sublimation is what, and you can keep on subliming it, and you have to sublime apparently the highest desire, that I want to get liberated. Because if you hold on to this thought of I want to get liberated, that is also not going to happen. So if you let go of that desire also. Gurudev always talks about this pole vault example. Once you get to that height, if you want to go over, you have to drop the pole. You can't hold on to the pole and go to the other side.
Okay, any thoughts on sublimation?
No, because I am not above desires. I think we all have desires. No, but I think this idea of saying the slokam, for example, right? Like before we eat. Uh yes, we are offering it to a higher form, okay, but we are not eating just to sustain. There is like there are cravings, right? And those are the desires. So to just, I mean, sometimes I wonder when we do when we say the slokam also. Yeah, I'm really wanting ramen today and I want ice cream after that. I'll just say Brahmarpanam and I'll feel like, okay, I've, brought it down a little bit. So all these desires, but I will say this, that when you feel that connection or that love with your, Ishtadevata, or that bhakti, it kind of justifies itself. It's like,
No,
his sin,
correct.
you gave me this, now I want it, now you take it.
No, think about it. Even gods have cravings. You have Ishta, Krishna likes this, Ganapati likes this.
Yeah.
See, they are also, even we have structured our system in such a way that you can justify your cravings. I have Modagam today. God, Ganesha likes it. I'm doing it for Ganesha. Krishna likes this thing, right? If you've put a certain dish for everybody, so you can totally you don't have to, again, so you don't have to say that, oh, I'm eating only to sustain, I'll eat only, this, whatever is that, one portion of carb and one portion of protein and one portion of fat that sustains my body. No, you are totally free to eat the most tasty food, the one with craving, because Ganesha, you need to have modagam. I used to, when I was small, whenever my mother used to make modagam, I used to take the whole bowl and put it in front of Ganesha, apparently. I don't remember, but I kind of have So I used to put all of those and take it, and I used to take everything that was made and put it, because apparently somehow somebody who came home told me that you should eat only after Ganesha eats. And I used to go and count the modagams and see if number has reduced to know if Ganesha has eaten it. This was when I had zero intelligence. But see, the idea that Ganesha likes modagam is telling you that, hey, have the thing that you likes. There is one God somewhere who likes it, and you are doing it for him.
No, but and this is not just about food, right? I mean, this is you can take this
Jewelry,
any other
ornaments, sari.
desire.
You see,
Yeah.
have you ever seen any of our gods not dressed well? I mean, why? I always have this argument that Devis have 4 hands, given 4 hands, so that they can wear lots of jewelry. Right, so they have you can do all of that. You can do all of that, but under the understanding that it's to you.
Yeah. So, but I think the idea of Sharanagati with regards to desire is pretty up there as far as trying to get there.
So I have two reflections. The first is one of the things that in Yuvakendra, one of the things that we had talked about last time as like an assignment to do was the next time you do whatever you're going to do, whether it's eating, prayer, take at least one episode of that week and do it in the name of Krishna, and then see how that event went. So anyway, that was the homework for last week. So there were several people that brought the idea of thinking about Krishna when they did their mechanical prayers that their parents told them to. There was some that studied with Krishna in mind, and then some that ate with Krishna in mind. And the one thing that all those children said is that they felt like they were more peaceful when they studied. They felt a more divine atmosphere when they prayed, but they also felt like they didn't eat as much as they would have eaten otherwise when they ate with Krishna in mind. With the idea that, yes, I think desires are an inherent human trait, there's no way around it. But I wonder if there is an opportunity, even with our desires, to somehow keep Krishna or God in mind, because in some ways it blunts the most tamasic or rajasic aspect of that desire and shapes it in a way that our best self is making that desire rather than the worst parts of ourselves, is one observation. The second observation I would make is, and this is something that I am actively working on now, which is there are some desires that we like to have. And then there are some desires that when we don't get it, we get very bent out of shape. And I think it's that second category that matters the most. In that, I would say that tomorrow, or say even on Vinayak Chaturthi, if you didn't give Ganesha modakams, how bent out of shape would Ganesha get? I think the answer would be probably not that bent out of shape, right? And so maybe it's not this idea of how are we when we have the desire, but how are we when we don't get what we want? And if we are a bad version of ourselves, then that is the desire that we need to work on. I don't know if that resonates with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, what you don't get, again, the ladder of fall is only so the desires, you'll have two kinds, like you said, right? You get or you don't get. When you get also, there are two categorizations. When you get it, you want to hold on to it also. Whatever you get, you want to hold on to it, right? Because the fear of losing what you got is immediate when you satisfy a desire. So fear of losing also is there. So the desires that that get you to a state of mental agitation when you don't get are definitely the first kinds of desires that you have to work on. There are certain desires that might not bother you. I think I don't even know if that doesn't bother you, can you call them even desires? If it happens or doesn't happen, you're probably at a state where it really doesn't matter. So it's probably no more a desire. It's just flow at that point. But if it is a desire that agitates us, if it doesn't get satisfied, I think that's definitely something that we all have to work on and find a way to sublime it with something higher. And resisting and trying to suppress a desire is not going to work, because that's going to bring more agitations. You have to sublime it with something with a higher purpose.
Yeah, I think if you can get to a point where the thing you want, you don't get, and you're able to say, well, maybe I wasn't supposed to get it today.
Yeah. Maybe
In
next
some
time.
ways, that is Sharanagati, right? That is surrender of the desire and surrender of the fruit of the desire to
Correct.
what should or eventually could happen. But again, not something that is entitled or one that I have an egoistic connection to the result.
That's prasada buddhi, right? You take whatever you get as grace and prasada. I did what I had a desire to get this. I did not get it. Like Swamiji said, right? God might give you something better. He's keeping something better for you, or he's saying that later. He says yes, no, maybe at a later time, whatever. Right? So this is maybe for a later time, or I've kept something good for you. Why are you looking at this small thing? I've kept something ready for you. A little, let it ripen a little more.
Yeah, so I think with that, we should try to come to a conclusion on at least today's discussion, which is, I think, the idea that, first of all, that surrender is hard, but surrender is a journey, and there's many levels of that journey. But probably the only person that knows if you have surrendered is yourself. It is only by taking your own temperature at different points in the day that you know whether you're achieving that point of giving up control or not giving up control. And I really have to reflect further upon this idea of absolute love being similar to absolute surrender. So, with that, we'll end. Hari Om. Thank you all.
Hari Om, thank
Carry
you
on.
so
Thank
much.
you.